Why are people not dissatisfied with their sales incentive? In India, I go to the other organization at 15% higher offer, right? And reject your offer. At this stage of the organization, for this role, where do I want to be in the market? Okay, this company is placing its developers at 75th percentile. Maybe they want to join that organization because even the career path would be steeper. You should know how is this organization treating this role, how important it is for them. They ask their employers that what is the compensation band in which I'm being hired.
Hey Anurag, welcome to the CuHRious Show. Thank you for being here and really excited to have you on here.
Likewise, Ranak, really excited to be here.
Cool, Anurag. I think before we get started, why don't you just quickly introduce yourself to the people who are listening in who don't know who Anurag is? Who is Anurag and what is Anurag up to nowadays?
Got it, got it. So, I'm Anurag. I am an engineer by profession, as in by graduation, you could say. By skill set, I am a professional, and by passion, I'm an entrepreneur. So, currently building CompUp, which helps companies make fair pay a reality for their employees. So, I've been building this since about 4 years now. Really enjoy building and selling products to HR folks. So yeah, that is where I am right now.
Cool, Anurag. I've always been intrigued by this. You're in that space, right, which is super important because that's that one thing which touches everyone in the organization, pay and money.
Right.
But at the same time, the least talked about. Just curious to understand, what made you come into this space? Like, why solving fair pay?
I'd say it is largely accidental. Initially, when we jumped into this, uh, idea was not exactly to solve for fair pay. Idea was to rationalize the biggest spend in the organization, which is people cost, right? And when we dive deeper into the problem, we realized that every company actually wants to pay its employees fairly. They just don't have the mechanism, the data and intelligence of how. And hence we started creating more and more around compensation, and eventually making fair pay a reality became the larger vision. When we started building CompUp, then it was called Hire Sure. We just wanted companies to roll out more efficient job offers to their candidates, basically offers that convert. And the pain point was how do you improve offer conversions, right? So we started building that for candidates, and then eventually it translated to how do you also manage pay for your employees. So I would say it is accidental. I didn't have a plan in mind.
Got it. But just getting a little tactical on this offer conversions. What was the problem statement basically there?
Okay, and this is something very unique to India. This is not a worldwide problem. So in India, what happens is that of 100 offers that you roll out, eventually only 40 candidates will join, right? And when you roll out 100 offers, around 95, 98 offers will get accepted, right? So people first accept the offer and then decide what to do with it. In the West, that is not the case. Of 100 offers that you roll out, maybe only 70 will get accepted and actually 69 people will join. In India, almost all offers get accepted, but actual people joining is just around 40 to 50%. That is a huge problem in India because this is the bottom of your hiring funnel, right? So irrespective of what you do above, as in your entire recruitment process is just 50% efficient because the bottom is just 50%, right? So there's so much of money being lost in recruitment process because of this, not small, but because of this problem of candidates not joining eventually. So that is the problem that we wanted to solve, but it is a very India specific problem.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, it's true. But you still see this problem today, or it was like a 2020 2021 money thrown around problem?
That's fair. That's fair. So this problem is lesser right now. In fact, we are also coming up with a report around how offer dropouts have changed because of this course correction, economy wise, right? So it is less, I would say, pervasive right now. It is still there, right? Even right now, of 100 offers that you roll out, by the way, there are few companies that are rolling out 100 offers now, but of 100 offers that get rolled out, eventually only 60-65 people will end up joining. So it is still there. It has slightly gotten better. Now people don't really care if you don't join, that's okay. There are many other candidates in the pipeline. For every role that you now have a job posting, there's so many profiles that come your way. So I think that top of the funnel is fairly sorted for companies, but it is only a change of time that will have all going back to the candidate. So I think it may not be that much of a candidate driven market right now, but it has always been and it will always be. So 6 months or let's say a year, it will come back to a candidate driven market where you'll again find it very difficult to make that hire. Even right now, I'm sure for the good quality candidates, it is still tough to hire them, but largely people are slightly relaxed when it comes to hiring because there's so many profiles available.
But it's interesting why this problem exists. I think it's a demand supply problem, isn't it? That good candidates are in short supply. That's why there are multiple offers. Is that the problem that you've seen?
Look, I think it's a culture problem in India. More, I would say, okay. So in India, firstly, notice periods are large, right? Which means once you decide to leave an organization, you have 60 days to look out for a job. In 60 days, a good candidate will find five, six offers, right? Because the person, she or he will be interviewing at so many places. Because of the long notice period, you have five offers. In the US, 15 days, a week's notice, you have maybe two offers. But why I still say it is a culture problem is because Indians find it very difficult to say no on the face, right? They do not want confrontation, which is why they let it go. They accept it. They'll stop responding to your calls, right? They find it easier to do. Whereas in the US, they'll say no to your offer, right? They'll not even accept it. So I think it is more to do with that. I won't say people are greedy. It is just that they lack commitment. So I'll give an example. If I say yes to an offer, right, I get a 10-15% better offer. I'll say no to you and probably go for the other offer, right? That is what happens a lot many times in India. I won't even come back asking for more. I'll not even, so I'll stop responding to your calls. I'll drop an email saying that, hey, I'm not looking for a change right now. I've been retained by my company or whatever, right? Instead of telling you upfront that, hey, I got a better offer, which is 15% higher, can you match this? Something like that, right? Maybe you're willing to pay 15% higher and, still retain me. In India, I go to the other organization at 15% higher offer, right? And reject your offer. And that this could be as late as one day before date of joining.
Hi everyone. Sorry that I'm interrupting the show, but first of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking your time out and listening to the pod. I hope that you're getting some value from the conversations that we have. Now, I have one request from everyone listening in. It will be really, really helpful for me if you can just go ahead and click a subscribe. I did an analysis and it appears that 95% of the people who listen to the show don't hit a subscribe. Now, the thing is, if I don't get those subscriber numbers, it's going to be pretty unsustainable to be doing this show for a long time. And the idea of this is not fame, popularity, but it's just to get the word and the message across to as many people as we possibly can, right? So can we have sort of like a gentleman and a ladies agreement between us, where if you've got any value from the show, you want to support me putting out more people related content and interesting conversations in the people space, please take a minute out and hit the subscribe button. I'll really, really appreciate it. Thank you, and back to the show.
We've had uh, all horror stories being posted on LinkedIn, right? About how they were waiting for the candidate on the date of joining and they didn't turn up.
Same here, man. Like the just remind of 2021 days where we had we were at like hardly 25%, and this is a company like MPL, which is good brand, pays a lot.
Correct.
25-27%. It was just horrible. And you're right, all of these come 2 days before.
Correct.
2 days before someone of the family is, I shouldn't say this, someone of the family is dying. Like, we know that's not happening. Just say the truth. Anyway, switching gears, Anurag, see, I'm really looking forward to just talking to you about compensation, right? Because and tell you the reality, which is sad reality, is having spoken to so many people, I realize that people have a very, I would say, superficial to no understanding of compensation. Right? Everybody thinks, well, I just get money, right? You
Correct.
ask for it, I'll get something, right? But people don't get that there's so much science and math behind it, right? When you're going to join a company, there is something called bands, ranges, pay grades, etc., etc., where you fit. right? I wanted to just take as much time as possible now, to just educate people, and you're the perfect person to do this. You've seen so many companies. So very broad-ended question. If let's say you are explaining what exactly compensation is, right, and all the nuances of compensation to someone who has no idea, how would you
Right.
do so?
Got it. And this is to an audience who is joining an organization, wants to understand.
Yeah. Let's say 2 3 years experience joining somewhere, looking out for another role, who's at a mid level. Because tend to see that when you start hiring, you get to know these nuances when you're like 5 6 years
Correct.
plus when you're a manager. But in that chasm of dissonance, nobody has any idea like how these compensations work.
Correct. And so I would say even people who start hiring, at times they don't have idea of
Hmm.
why this comp, right? So let me answer this in a manner of how exactly compensation is decided by an organization. So we all should agree on a point that companies want to be fair to their employees as well as to the employer, right? Which is why they have a science behind what compensation, right? And that has a lot to do with the type of an organization that you are building. So let's we have to decide first the types of roles that are necessary to build a certain type of business, right? For example, a manufacturing company might have very different roles than a product led social media company, right? Very different type of roles. So once we have decided the type of roles, next we decide the proficiency or the skill set in each of those roles, right? And this, by the way, will keep on changing with respect to the stage of the organization. Your first developer who builds the first version of your social media app might be very different in skill set than the developer who will be managing it when there are millions of users, right? So that skill set proficiency will also keep on changing. Once you have decided on that, then you decide that okay, at this stage of the organization for this role, where do I want to be in the market, right? Do I want the top talent who is extremely skilled in machine learning algorithms, or I want someone who is at the market, as in at the midpoint of the market, something of that sort, right? And that is how pay ranges are built in an organization, right? So once you have decided on the role, decided on the proficiency, decided on the market that you are competing with, you then decide your position, that do you want to lag the market, as in pay slightly below the market. And this could happen in the early stages of an organization, basically early stage or mid stage startups could pay lesser than the median, right? A growth stage might pay at the median. Eventually, they might choose to pay 75th percentile, 90th percentile, come back to 50th percentile when they do an IPO, right? So all of this could happen. But once they've decided that, that is how the compensation range will get decided. So let's say for a developer, compensation range is 12 to 18 lakhs, right? Then they decide, okay, a person entering 12, how long does one stay within the band before getting promoted to the next level, becomes an SD2, for example, right? And that is the now for a new candidate who's coming in, that candidate might think that I am an SD1, right? And I'm going in an organization, and they might start comparing themselves with SD1s across the world. That is not true, right? You will get paid what that role is supposed to get paid in this organization. SD1 compensation band might be very different in MPL versus in CompUp, right? Which is why you should, if your friend works at MPL versus if your friend, or if you're joining CompUp as an SD1, bands could be different. I could be paying between 12 to 18, MPL could be paying 18 to 24, right? And hence how much you'll pay depends not on your designation, but on the band that has been built within that organization for that designation, right? So that is what will govern your compensation, the way you grow in compensation. And unfortunately, in India, publicly available information around that is extremely limited, which is why candidates often don't know this. If they get to know, of course they'll be able to place their bets better if they get to know, for example, that okay, this company is placing its developers at 75th percentile. Maybe they want to join that organization because even the career path would be steeper versus an organization that is pegging their developers at maybe 50th percentile. It might be easier to get in, but the growth might be slower.
Interesting. So, but why would, just taking a step back, so the companies who, let's say, are doing it in the 50th percentile, right? I can understand why you're doing it. Of course, like you're young, or probably you're starting cost, you have cost pressures, you don't have unlimited budget. But as an organization, then how am I offsetting that? How am I getting talent? Because I'm money wise, I'm shunted, right?
Correct.
So how do I do that?
Okay, so there's all range of talent available, right? 50th percentile doesn't mean I'm paying 50% lesser. It just means I'm hiring that type of talent. So there is obviously talent available at the 50th percentile, right? In fact, there is lesser talent available at the 90th percentile. There's very limited people with everyone wanting them, right? It has a bell curve of its own. So there will be a large percentage of people who are placed close to the 50th percentile, which is why it is not that it will be difficult for you to hire in the 50th percentile. Of course, as recruiters, it is easier for you to give higher offers and then hire the person who was at 50th percentile at 90th percentile in your organization, right? But ideally, it is, it is fairly possible to hire at any percentile, I would say, which is not
Basically, you're
that
aware
difficult.
of what you're hiring, what's the skill set you're looking at.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think that's the problem that happens, right? You are giving 50th percentile, but you want the candidates who are like the 90th.
Correct, correct. That is the problem. You're absolutely right. You talk to the founders and they'll say, "Ki, I want the best of talent," right? When you talk about percentiles without compensation, they'll say, "I want the 90th percentile talent." And when it comes to creating compensation band, they'll be like, we don't have that kind of money right now. What we can pay in terms of fixed pay is at the 50th percentile. But at 50th percentile, you probably get talent which is 50th percentile, right? That is slightly tough to understand, but yeah, that is what the reality is. If you are giving 50th percentile, you will attract and retain talent that is 50th percentile, which is good, by the way. It is not bad. That is what the market is.
Yeah, yeah.
90th is exception. 90th is not the norm.
Interesting. I never thought of that. So I'm guessing the bell curve is, again, it's a normal bell curve where it's
Absolutely.
interesting. We all think that it's inflated on this side. It's not true.
No, no, not at all.
But I had a question. Just coming back to the science on comp. Again, just getting, let's say, advisory for people who want to apply. Right? You made a point that someone who's applying need to be aware of where the bands of the companies are. So how does, let's say, someone who's joining their second company go about this, right? And unfortunately in India, our money conversations always come at the end, right?
Correct.
We go through 5 rounds of interview, then the offer comes in.
Correct.
What hacks or tips or advice would you have for someone to sort of go in with more information as a candidate, right? To that dreaded meeting about comp with the HR/manager.
Got it. I think it is fairly simple. It is just that, as I mentioned, it is not publicly spoken about, which is why people are not aware. So I think as candidates, you should know uh, with respect to the role that you're applying for, be it sales, marketing, or product, or let's say engineering, you should know how is this organization treating this role. When I say treating, as in how important it is for them. For example, maybe a product led social media company may not pay that much importance to a sales function, right? It is possible, right? It is product led. Maybe they pay more emphasis on the quality of product team, engineering team that they hire. Probably, I'm not saying that will be true for everyone. I'm just assuming because there are certain functions with respect to the nature of business that become more important. Hence, you'll pay more to those folks always because you have to retain, because that is your critical talent, right? We define against our employees who is critical talent. So that becomes your critical talent. So, first, as a candidate, you should know if you fall in that bucket of critical talent in this organization or not, right? It is best to be in a place where your function is critical talent, you'll always be paid the highest, right? Or you'll be taken really good care of, let's put it that ways, right?
Mm.
The second point is, as a candidate, I think it is fair. Now I have seen many people do those conversations now. They ask their employers that what is the compensation band in which I'm being hired, right? Because
Okay.
yes, and recruiters might say no to this, they might not reveal this, but it is, I think, fair to ask, right? Just because you've asked that, they won't say no to you for a role right? So
Mm.
it is just that they'll think that, okay, now you're aware, you cannot be played, as you mentioned, right? How do candidates get uh not get played, right? So if I ask as a candidate to you, hey Ranak, I've applied for this role, but before we go into the process, I need to understand two things. What does your philosophy say with respect to this role? Where are you pegged with respect to market? Are you at the market, 50th percentile, above market, or you're lagging the market with respect to this role? That is one question that I'll ask you, so that I get to know the relative importance of this role in your organization. That is one. The second part is, I'll ask you, what is the compensation band for this role that I'm applying for, right?
Mm.
Now, once I get to know, let's say I'm applying for XYZ role, the compensation band is 12 to 18 lakhs. Now, the basic is, I cannot be offered something which is below 12 lakhs, right?
Mm.
Because that is the minimum of the band. In fact, you will yourself not offer me, right? Once you have told this to me, let's say 12 to 18 is what the compensation band is. Next, I'll ask, what is the tenure in the band before I get promoted? Which means, if I'm being hired at this position, if I have to spend, say, let's say 3 years to get promoted, the next question will be, hey, Ranak, in my current role, I've already spent 1 year in this organization for the same role. If I'm going to spend 3 more years, whereas you hire freshers for this role, right? When you hire them at the starting of the band, which means I ideally should be placed somewhere above the below of the band, because I've already spent 1 year, right? And I should ideally get promoted in 2 years, not 3 years. So is that a fair ask? Is that what I should expect? And
Mm.
I think answers to these questions will eventually help me place myself fairly in this compensation band. But the problem is, it is easier said than done. People in India may not have compensation bands created, right? Uh, but even though there may not be compensation band runner, there still will be a median around which they are told to hire. So every recruitment team will have some mandate that, okay, this is the band, or this is the ballpark figure around which you have to hire. So I think you can still have these conversations. It, if not gets to the compensation band, it still gives recruiters a perspective that they cannot play around
Mm.
with offering you lower salary than what they should ideally be offering you. So I think, yeah, I think this is very simple to do. Just three questions, and you'll be fairly paid.
But something that you just said, a lot of startups will not have this, right? But they'll have that median, right?
Correct.
Just for people listening in, like median is like the middle point at which, let's say for a for a salary a role, 15 lakhs is the midpoint, right? And people go
Correct.
less or beyond that. Have you
Correct.
seen any math behind that, or that's just past experience based, or people in this role are getting 15? That's how 15 is decided.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Very interesting question. And this is the science of creating a compensation band. Unfortunately, uh, creating compensation band is more reactive and comes very late in the organizations in India, rather than being proactive and hiring people within that band. So unfortunately,
Yogi,
it
I'm
is a
more
mix of both.
reactive than that.
Right. So when you create bands in your organization at late stages, you not just have to look at the role and where you want to peg your role with respect to market, you also have to look at where your people are placed right now, which is the unfortunate thing, because then you have to force fit, or you have to do major course correction, and that could involve
Mm.
laying off people, right? And all of that, or bringing people who are underpaid at par, which might incur a significant cost, right?
Mm.
So these are the things that you will have to do. But yes, you're right. If you decide just on the basis of market and are not inward looking, you eventually end up creating a lot of pay disparities, a lot of dissatisfaction amongst your existing employees, because people get to know what the salaries are, right?
Mm.
Eventually. So as soon as you create a compensation band where the midpoint is pegged, let's say, much higher than the existing people, You are going to hire new people within that band, right? That is why you've created that band, which means
Hmm.
new people will be hired at much higher compensation than the existing folks, which is in a way also unfair for them, right?
Hmm.
And of course, because they would also get to know of that, they'll be highly dissatisfied, they'll be demotivated, there'll be attrition issues. So it is better not to do, right?
Hmm.
So yeah,
Oh.
so I think it is both ways, both inward looking where your current employees are placed versus where you want to be with respect to the market, is how eventually you would decide the midpoint of your band. And the breadth, as in the spread of the band, depends on the number of years that your people have to spend in that band. I'll give an example. Let's say your top performer who joins you at 12 lakhs
Hmm.
will get three increments before he or she is promoted. Ideally they should not cross the band, right? So now you can put a number. If they get the top performers and they require three increments, let's say they are getting 20% increment every year or 25%, you have to do that maths. 12 multiplied by 1.25 multiplied by 1.25, that are two times getting increment. Are
Hmm.
they not crossing the band? Typically the spread is taken as 40 to 50%. That is standard that people usually do. But more scientifically, it depends on the number of times you have to get an increment within that band.
And that depends, right? Some will have three increments, some will have two. And I'm
Absolutely
guessing early stage companies will have just one, and then you have to keep promoting.
possible. That's possible. Depends on the level of that band. Yes, that's true.
Uh, I mean, hearing all of this just seems like, and I'm taking the lens of a startup, let's say a startup founder, right? It makes sense to do this early than late, right? What would be the sweet spot for you, like if as a startup, right?
Right.
When you should do this? I know you're going to say like day zero, but realistically, what do you
Correct.
think is the sweet spot? When should a company start seriously thinking about making these ranges and the math behind it?
I would say so. Initially, when the startup is very initial stages, let's say less than 100 employees, right?
Hmm.
You don't typically have a lot of people for the same role, right? You would have, let's say,
Hmm.
for 100 people organization, you would have 80 unique roles, right? There are very few people doing the same jobs, limited number of people. But once you start filling in more people, that is when you have to pay employees fairly. If there's just one person in a role, that is the midpoint, right? That person is being paid fairly, so to say, right? But by the way, I'm not talking about being absolutely fair with respect to market, but with respect to pay disparity. There's no pay disparity.
Hmm.
There's just one person who's being paid that much. When there are two people being paid unequally, that is when pay disparities come, right? So that is when you start thinking more rationally about creating bands and all of this. I think sweet spot would be somewhere around 150 200 people strong, and that has a lot to do with the maturity of the HR practices and policies. For example, you just see when a rewards hire is made in India, typically upwards of, let's say, 500 employees. When is the rewards hire made in the US? Maybe 150, 200 employees. Because they want, people spend is the largest spend in any organization, largely, right? And that is
Okay. Yeah.
by a margin. 60 to 70% of the total P&L spend is people cost. Now the question is, when do you want to optimize that? Ideal answer is always, but
Hmm.
given that you will not make a rewards hire before 200 employees, so I would say maybe around 200 employees, when you make the first rewards hire to optimize your people cost, that is when bands should be created. And bands go restructuring as you grow. Your needs from a role in a growth stage startup, let's say when you're scaling from series A to a series D, might be different versus when you're D plus, right? You
Hmm.
might want different type of people for the role or different proficiency or skill set, and hence your job bands will go for a change. Ideally they go for a change three times before. So one is once they're created in the growth stage, one is when you're in the late stage, and the last is the scale stage, when, let's say, an IPO stage. So you'll have three, I would say, two restructuring of your bands that will happen in the journey to an IPO. But yeah, usually companies create their bands when they go for an IPO. That also happens.
Oh man, I hope not. But yeah, I think it happens. Yeah. No, you're right. I think something interesting you said. just taking our example, right? We are like 100 plus doing it now. But what really made us do it, because it's not like 80 roles, right? There are a limited set of roles
Correct.
and multiple people in the same role. I think that's a very good yardstick. Even if you're like, it's a 50, 60 people, and you've
Correct.
got like 10 roles, and every role you've got six, seven people. I think that's
Correct.
when people should start thinking. Yeah,
Absolutely right.
otherwise it creates too many problems. You rather do it earlier than do it later.
Absolutely right.
Cool. Again, so we spoke of like what the science behind it is, right, and how someone should, let's say, navigate this with the HR. But I'm just very curious about the landscape today, right? We spoke of things that people should do. What's happening today, like in the startups, and you've seen multiple startups in India.
Right.
What's happening with India? How is this being managed today? Is it Excel sheets? Is there tools? What's happening in India versus, let's say, abroad?
Got it. Got it. So, so I'll answer. So this has two aspects. This question has two aspects. One is how this is happening today, which is what is the ground reality, and then
Hmm.
the other part is how it should ideally be happening. Right? Let's say,
Hmm.
let's first see how increments are decided right now, and
Hmm.
then how increments are decided ideally should be decided. Or let me answer the second one first. How it should ideally be decided,
Hmm.
being fair to candidates, employees, everyone. Ideally, in order to be fair to everyone, to be fair, that includes being fair to the organization, uh, the increment that a person gets is a factor of one, the budget that the company has. That becomes the base, so to say,
Hmm.
right? The other is, let's say, how your role has moved in the market, right? Because now the salaries that are going for your role, basically market movement with respect to a function, maybe. So which function you belong to has a role to play on what is your base increment. So I'll give an example. Basis the surveys also that we do, engineering will have a base of around 15% this year. Sales will have a base percentage of around 8 to 9% this year,
Hmm.
right? So which function you belong to will also define what the base increment is. Then, depending upon how strong pay for performance as a culture is in the organization, your increment will be differentiated if you are a meets expectation versus if you are an outstanding performer. Typically, if you were to talk specifically of the startup ecosystem, in late stage startups, we have seen this differentiation to be around 1.4x, which means if you're getting 10% increment at meets expectation, you will get 14% at outstanding performer. Typically, of course, there are a lot many factors, but this is typically what the
Hmm.
differentiation is with respect to performance. Of course, a Netflix would do a 2x. That is
Hmm.
how strong their pay for performance as a philosophy might be, right? Other
Hmm.
companies may not be. They can go just maybe 1.1x. Other factors would be the level that you belong to. Senior levels will not get that high cash increments. Junior levels will. So if you are an IC role, junior levels, let's say between 1 to 7, 8 years of experience, you will get a good increment in terms of fixed pay versus if you are more senior, right? You will have a lesser base increment. So seniority has a role to play in increments. Then whether you are already overpaid or underpaid, because companies want to be fair, or ideally should be fair. If you are underpaid, they should pull you up. Your increment should be higher. So two people, let's say Ranak and Anurag, both are in the same role, outstanding performers.
Hmm.
Ranak is paid 12 lakhs, Anurag is paid 18 lakhs. If both of our increment is 20%, the
Yeah.
pay disparity or the difference in pay of Ranak and Anurag will increase.
Increase. Yeah.
Ideally, it should decrease, which is why increment that Anurag should be getting percentage wise, not absolute value wise, percentage wise should be more than Ranak. And
Hmm.
that is being fair to employees. So, with where you are placed with respect to your compensation band will have a role to play in what your increment is. And then people have more to their reward philosophy. For example, people have come up with this potential of an employee as a parameter
Hmm.
basis which they'll want to differentiate. If or not you fall in the critical talent is when you the increment percentage might differ. And of course, if you're getting promoted, the increment percentage might differ, right? So these factors mathematically govern what my ideal increment percentage should be. On top of this, there's one more factor, which is your manager discretion. It could be both positive and negative. Whether my manager feels that I have to get slightly extra or slightly lesser with respect to the maths that has been given by the team. So this is how scientifically very mature organization with, when I say mature, practices wise, reward practices wise, if the organizations are mature, they do increments like this very scientifically, right? And they leave very little room, by the way, for the managers to make a decision, right? They'll have strict guardrails around how much you can deviate from the central suggestion. Now let's come to how it is actually being done. Now actually, let's say a company has 10% increment budget. They might differentiate, let's say, on the basis of function, that okay, my engineering leader will get a 15% increment budget, my sales leader will get a 9% increment budget, my marketing leader will get a 10% increment budget.
But how's that happening today? Just random discretion.
15%, 10%
Yeah,
budget.
ISCO 15, ISCO 10, this person
Acha,
will
nahi,
get.
that is on the basis of market survey. They know how functions have
Okay,
moved
okay.
in the last 1 year, basis which, by the way, many companies will do it randomly also. 10% budget aaya hai, every manager gets 10%, do whatever you want.
Hmm.
That is also there, but let's talk about slightly more scientific organization. So on the basis of how functions have moved, they'll just give their VP of engineering or CTO 15% budget,
Hmm.
and more mature organization will democratize this decision even down. So CTO will retain some budget and give the remaining to VP of engineering. VP of engineering will then decide increment of her or his team, or might give it lower also. It will not translate down to the last manager, because they may not be equipped, or compensation wise, that okay, they may not be mature to take compensation decisions of people, even though those are reporting managers. So at a certain level it will be restricted. They have budgets. If they get no guidance from the central team, the maths that you talked about, which is in many organizations, they
Hmm.
do whatever they want. Even their decisions may not be consistent, which means, let's say, one team is giving 20% to a top performer, to another top performer they may give 18%. Forget being fair, they're not even consistent in their decision making, right?
Hmm.
And that is what is the sad reality of the current landscape that you talked about, right? That this is how increments are done, which is why uh, employees feel there is a bias. Of course, of course they will feel that there is a bias. If you leave so much to managers discretion, eventually this leads to dissatisfaction, biases, and all of that, right? So this is how it is actually being managed right now.
First of all, thank you. This was a very well structured explanation. I hope people listen to this because that's the reality, right? Because that's what happens now when you're let's take the last case when managers are making their discretionary spends or discretionary increments. There are certain pockets which is not happy. People who get lesser. Vice versa, what you said, even if we do it on a math based, right, and somebody who's underpaid will get a high increment, the guy who's higher paid will get a lower increment, or that person is unhappy.
Hmm.
It's kind of like, I think, yeah, good communication, I think, is a key here, and education,
Absolutely.
and that education sort of should not come from the organization because then it'll feel preachy that hey, मेरे को तो कम दे रहे हैं तो just like
It has a
that's
lot
what.
to do with communication. Absolutely right. The way it is communicated to the employees, explain, and we'll talk about that also. But yeah, it has a lot to do with that.
Right. And now the obvious question, I'm curious, like I know people, let's even take companies who still have the math and structure behind it. They're doing it on Excel. How
Right.
does tech come in here and help or solve this big problem? Because it's a lot of data, right? We are talking.
Right. Right. So okay, uh, imagine an organization which is, let's say, 1,000 employees, right? And they actually have a lot of science in place. They have a lot of maths that they do on an Excel sheet, right? And they come up with a very logical suggested increment number against every employee. Now, okay, one part that we missed. Ideally, managers should get a budget in line with what the suggested increment is of people under them. What I mean by that is, let's say Ranak's suggested increment was, in terms of value, 3 lakhs. In terms of value, let's say Anurag's suggested increment was 2 lakhs. And let's say we are the only two direct reportees to a manager. Ideally, our manager should have a budget of 5 lakhs.
Mm-hmm.
not 15% or 10% randomly, right? And that is because if you do not do that, two managers, one manager which has a high performing team and underpaid team,
Mm-hmm.
another manager maybe not so high performing team but overpaid team, ideally their budgets should be different, right? Even though both are in engineering, both are VPs of engineering, they should have different budgets. But if you do not take that into account, you are not, see,
Mm.
you might say that I reward for performance, I'm building a high performance culture, but if you're giving same budgets to your managers, one manager has a lot to spend on mediocre employees, another person who is actually has to reward top performers does not have enough budget. Ideally it should be redistributed in a manner that you are able to pay more to the top performers, right? So now, coming back to Excel sheets. Now, this is how it should ideally be done with respect to managers. Imagine
It's
logistics of,
impossible to do that on an Excel sheet, what you
exactly,
just said.
exactly my point. So, the logistics of distributing 50 different, so let's say organization of around 1,000 employees will have at least 30 people who are responsible for increment decisions.
Hmm.
Forget 30, let's say 10. You have
Hmm.
to create 10 Excel sheets which goes with a guidance that this is the suggested number, which will have from A to AZ columns, because in order to make a fair compensation decision, you would want to equip your managers not just with the current state of compensation, but maybe historical compensation. Let's say your employee has been working with you for 4 years.
Hmm.
Do you show them a graph of how the career has progressed? Ideally, there should be a CAGR number, right? How this
Hmm.
employee has been getting increments in the past.
Hmm.
There is evidence with respect to surveys. I'll not name the company. People who joined the organization at more than 30% salary increments, right, were not necessarily the top performers, right? Which means, let's say a manager knows that, okay, this employee, when this person joined the company, already got a 50% increase. In the last increment cycle, also, he has been getting a 40% increment because he threatened that otherwise he'll leave, right?
Hmm.
Now, should I give a 40% increment again when you are a mediocre performer? Maybe not, right? So, historical context is also very important. How many columns will you make in an Excel sheet to do that? Plus, can you give more insights? Can you be more proactive in telling them how this person is placed with respect to peers? How many filters will a person apply on an Excel sheet? So, the first and biggest problem is managing the logistics of Excel sheet, which is why it becomes slightly more cumbersome if you are wanting to be fair, wanting to be very scientific on an Excel sheet. That is the biggest problem. The
True.
periphery problems are, there's so many compliance issues. What if you wanted your managers to change one column but they made some changes somewhere else? How do you maintain the sanity of your data? Maybe they altered by mistake some other compensation number, existing compensation number. What will you do then? What if they go to the version history of Excel sheet and saw the columns that you deleted or the rows that you deleted and see compensation of a person who is in the core team, the senior team members? People do all sorts of funny things, right, on an Excel sheet. So
Or
these are
they
the
add a
problems
they add a zero like the Lyft CEO.
of
Hey, sorry, yeah, coming back to what you're saying.
yeah. So this is what the problem of managing Excel sheets is, right? It becomes a compliance problem, so to say. Now imagine your another example, me as an employee, my compensation is dependent on, one, whether you are being scientific or not, second, what my manager's discretion is, and lastly, it is also dependent on whether or not you make errors in an Excel sheet, right? So it is unnecessarily dependent on errors in an Excel sheet, which will be there. So I think that is the main reason of why it should not be done in an Excel sheet. One, you cannot be very scientific, and the second part is it is prone to errors, prone to, you cannot give all that information to your managers that ought to be ideally be given. So I think that is the primary reason. In India, a large percentage of the companies still manage it in Excel sheets, are not very scientific. But I've also come across new age companies, again, I'll not name the company, although this is a good thing to say. So there's this company in India, a unicorn, very beautifully created Excel sheets, very scientific. They have done everything that they would have done in a software. They just didn't opt for a software because they hadn't seen a software which could replicate all of it what they did in an Excel sheet, and that was their bottleneck of not opting for a software. Eventually, they will, but that was the reason. So there are companies who are doing it scientifically. As I said, maturity of the rewards processes is what will govern whether you do it on an Excel or on a software eventually. In the US, large percentage does it on a software than in an Excel sheet.
And is this software, like, is it also democratizing this? It's just for the core team, the comp team, or it's for everybody, managers, everyone is getting it?
Everyone is getting it. So it is easier to democratize, easier to collect recommendation, easier to eliminate bias. I mean, uh, one basic activity that you have to do after collecting your manager recommendation is check for biases. What if, on an average, your managers have gone above the recommendation for seniors and below the recommendation for juniors because they tend to be closer to seniors? What if it's a seniority bias? What if your managers, on an average, have gone above the recommendation for males and below the suggestion for females? That's a gender bias. It could happen. So imagine collecting all of that data and then doing all sorts of analysis manually.
Hmm.
I would say very few companies do it right now. Should they do it? Of course, they should do it, right? In India, there are no laws against gender bias or something of that sort. But yesterday, Oracle got sued for paying one of their female employees unfairly, right? I'm not sure of the compensation that they had to pay for that female employee, but that regardless of that, imagine the dent it made on the brand image of Oracle. Such a big name, and you're not able to pay your employees fairly. You're having a gender bias, right? So that is the reason why you need a software, right? More than anything else.
And this maturity you're saying is there already in US, because I imagine in Europe you already have those laws, right, which makes it mandatory. But
Correct.
US, I actually don't know. But what's the maturity in US today?
Oh, extremely mature. So one, we discussed about compensation bands, right? In many states, almost all, uh, pay transparency is something which is mandated by law, which means you need to have central repository of your compensation bands, and a candidate or an employee can seek that compensation band from you any point in time.
Wait, this is in US also, so it's a law in US
In
also.
US also, yes.
Oh, okay, okay.
Correct. So you have to present that information to either candidate or employee. In some states, it is even mandated by law. In the job postings, you need to have your compensation band displayed
Hmm.
so that candidates are not getting played, right? So you need to mention that in the job posting itself.
Interesting. And I can always put like 5 to 30 kind of.
No, no. So there is a limit to that also. How much of width it can
Okay.
be.
Okay.
Also, there needs to be one source of truth. If you have 5 to 30, I mean, imagine having that as a compensation band internally, right? You would not have that, right? Because you
Not
have to
that
also
much.
run a company, right? So whatever
I
you have internally is what you'll have to publish.
got it. No, it's interesting when you were saying in my previous company, we did all of this. Like, and an Excel sheet went on for 30, 40 rows. And the
Correct.
only reason I think we never went a tool route was because there wasn't a tool. You couldn't imagine that, uh, a tool should also exist for this, but then it would have been a no brainer. If a tool that, I think a big problem was obviously with managers, because I distinctly remember managers, and these are senior managers, right?
Correct.
They complained that, my God, look at this Excel. What do I do with this? There's just
Correct.
so much data. I'm not able to understand this.
Correct.
No, fair point. I just want to touch on something that we haven't spoken on yet, which is all the non-comp elements, specifically ESOP.
Correct.
Right? What's your take on ESOP? A lot gets spoken about ESOP, especially obviously ESOP is only there for startups.
Mhm.
Uh, what's your take on ESOPs today? Like at an Indian scale, are we doing it right, or we just using it as a, what do I say, as a bait, uh, than a real tool to make money, real compensation lever? How have you seen this play out in India so far?
Um, I think as of now we are in a bad phase with respect to ESOPs.
Mm.
There will be few liquidity events that are happening. I think this year is going to be better with so many IPOs happening. There'll be a lot of liquidity that ways. There'll be a lot of success stories to talk about. Uh, Now let's talk about the intention of ESOPs first, right? Intention is that when we are making employees a part of a journey, it should be rewarding for them as well for putting in the hard work that is close to what a founder is also doing, right? So they should be more than fairly be compensated for the risk that they are taking. That is the philosophy behind how do you make them feel a part of the journey and all of that, and also reward them for that. So I don't think people offering ESOPs are wanting to just play around with that, right? Specifically in India, when nobody gets played around with ESOPs, everybody thinks it is paper money only, right?
Mm.
So not a lot of candidates understand ESOP because there's so little education around ESOPs. There's so
Mm.
few, I would say, success stories, people talking about it publicly, that people don't value it, firstly. But the intention of an employer to give ESOP to their employees. Now, how much do you want uh, ESOPs to spread? What percentage of your employees? That is something which is different. I
Mm.
think for a cred, it is almost 100% of the employees. They want everyone to be a part of their growth journey.
Yeah.
Some companies, maybe 20% of the employees will have ESOPs, right? So they absolutely want to be fair. They're not playing around. In fact, if you talk about more mature economies, people take a pay cut because they understand the value of ESOPs. They take a pay cut and join a startup at higher ESOP value because they understand the potential and the wealth creation that it will have for them in the long term. In India, I have rarely come across people who take a pay cut
Mm.
and get compensated extra with ESOPs and then join. They join probably at lesser increment and huge ESOPs, but never take a pay cut. So employer is not playing around. They just want their employees to be fairly compensated for being a part of a startup, which is sort of risky. And I think they are doing a good job of compensating employees using ESOPs. The only problem with Indian ESOPs right now is that there is so little education, people don't value it, right?
Mm.
And the other problem with this is, as a startup maturity wise, we are yet to see many success stories happening, right? So once we see that happening, for example, let's say my friend got so, and many of my friends have made a lot of money using the ESOP liquidity, be it at ShareChat or Cred or other organizations, because I have seen that happen to them and their lives. Will I not value ESOPs? I will, right? And I've seen so many of my friends change their mindset towards ESOPs, thinking that, okay, and this is after spending 7, 8 years in more traditional organizations. They now want to join startups, thinking that, no, I want to be a part of an early stage startup, let's say a Series A, Series B startup, and be there until it goes for an IPO because I want to create wealth for myself, right?
Mm.
Not for anything else. I want to create wealth for myself. So they're seeing startups as an avenue, as a very plausible avenue to make wealth. So that shift is happening. Whether that shift will happen for the freshers, maybe that it is still time that it will happen. But I think as and when more success stories come, it will happen. And with that happening, there will be more, I think, education even for employers. How much ESOPs to be given to whom? There is so limited understanding and knowledge around ESOPs benchmarking. We ourselves are coming up with ESOPs benchmarking so that startups know how much to pay. Right? As of now, it is left, right, and center. You pay 20 lakhs of ESOPs to somebody, right? In value, you may pay 40 lakhs to somebody else. Now, next year, will you bring the other person also to 40 lakhs or not? You don't know, right? So what is, we talk about fair pay with respect to fixed cash. What is fair pay with respect to ESOPs? What is the benchmarks for that? So I
But,
think
but Anurag,
we're
let's
yet to
talk
get
a
there.
little bit of that because that's something that I was very keen on. How do you fairly pay somebody ESOPs? And again, it's very clear when you're joining a company how much pay you can ask. But how much
Hmm.
ESOPs do you ask? That's like a very gray area for anybody. How much ESOPs can I ask? I'll tell you my side. What I've seen people, they look at, this is what I used to have, so I will ask that amount, which is absolutely wrong, right?
Correct.
It's I think the most unscientific way. What have you seen, or in your mind, what would be an ideal way for somebody to
Correct.
ask ESOPs?
Oh, there is honestly, Ranak, I don't have an answer to that. Unlike if you asked me with respect to the fixed pay, I would have an answer to that. But with these jobs, I don't because, I, okay, let's come to what is fair to ask. What is fair to ask is what is the market pay for that role, right? Market pay as an information is, I think, largely available to some extent. Market pay with respect to ESOP is not available, and I think that is yet to standardize. Once it gets standardized is when we can have an answer that okay, this is what is fair to ask. I'll give an example. The first developer in an organization, seed stage company, less than $50 million of valuation, what is the benchmark of ESOP that should be given? We are coming up with an answer, as in we are coming up with benchmarks for that. But until that happens at a large scale, until that information is publicly available, we don't know.
Hmm.
Is it 20 lakhs? Is it 30 lakhs? Is it 0.001% of the company, or is it 0.0015% of the company? We don't know. Once those benchmarks are there, we would know. So to answer your question, I don't have an answer right now. With this is not something which is that readily available in information.
Hmm. And I'm looking forward to your report because it's something that I've
Absolutely
struggled with. I think at
correct.
least the anecdotally what I've seen work to a small extent, and I follow it is we've pegged it to your CTC. Now that probably may not be right, probably it is, but when you're
Correct.
making an offer, we've put ranges, right? zero point
Correct.
0.5 to 1 to 2, cannot go beyond 2 because typically asked around and check, it doesn't happen. Like if somebody, you're hiring somebody at 50, very very unlikely. Again, depends on stage. I must add, if you're
Correct.
for an early stage, obviously you'll index more on ESOPs, but when you reach some sort of maturity, you're at series C plus, we've seen 1:1 is a decent ratio to give as a max, and at a very senior role 1:2 at a max. Again, looking forward to your report because again, this is just, we've thought this is the right way to do it, and I've seen in a couple of companies, but yeah, it's difficult that way. Like for somebody,
Correct.
I think what is not, what you shouldn't ask is, I was getting this in the previous company, so
Oh,
match that.
absolutely not.
That doesn't make sense, and that's where I've seen
Different
candidates come in.
companies, different
Yeah.
valuations. What was the in fact, in your previous organization, what was the strike price, right?
Mm.
How much of an exercise window were you given? I have people in my organization who couldn't exercise ESOPs because the exercise window was just 90 days. They would have to pay 30% of tax without any foreseeable future of wealth creation, right? It is absolutely unfair for having
Okay.
a 90 days of exercise window. It should be infinite. I know rules do not allow it to be infinite. There has to be a number. Put it 5 years, and every 3 years keep on increasing it. Right? I mean, imagine you have given your people ESOPs. There is no liquidity happening soon, right? Uh,
Mm.
Now, do you expect an employee to necessarily be there till IPO? I'm not sure if they want to be a part of that journey. Maybe they enjoyed the growth stage, scale stage, they may not enjoy, right? So you have to let them go, but then you should not let go of the ESOPs that they've earned, right? Which
Mm.
is unfair. So, but yeah, I mean, eventually these practices will change, and that is when more confidence on ESOPs will kick in by the people. And to answer one more part of your question, how much of ESOPs? The way it started eventually was how much of a pay cut you are taking. Four
Mm.
times of that, let's say vesting period is four. Four times of that is what is the ESOPs that you would be given, so that we have compensated you for the pay cut that you are taking, but we have compensated with you with the value of stocks which will have multifold wealth creation versus your cash which will not grow multifold, right? From that to now using that to attract, there's no limit to the ESOPs that people are currently paying.
Just to clarify something you said for those listening in, the 30% tax sort of comes in when you leave a company and you have to, ESOP is the right to get the share. And
Correct.
when you convert it, you actually get shares. You have to pay a 30% tax, which our government has put on us, right? And this is on the
Absolutely.
current value of the stock, right? Which always comes to a massive amount, which most people cannot pay. Hence, they
Absolutely.
hence they let go of their shares, which is wrong. I was reading a report which Aeon just came a few months back. Good to see that at least they are saying that 50% of the startups now have a 10-year window, or I think it was
Oh,
a 5
nice.
plus window. Most startups now have a long window than a short window, but
Correct.
there's still a certain set of people who do it for 3 months, which is, yeah, which is not right. You
Not right.
काट रहे basically in लोगों का. Uh,
Correct. Simply put, that is true. That is why
well,
people lose trust on ESOPs.
yeah, and you're right. So US may there's been so many stories we hear of, and it's easier to do an IPO there, right? The market is bigger. There is
Right.
always buyouts happening. So a
Correct.
lot of these liquidity events. By the way, just to clarify for people, what are the liquidity events that you've seen in ESOPs? When can people
Okay.
make money from ESOPs, basically?
Okay. So one is of course the big event, which is an IPO, when your shares can be publicly traded, right? That is of course the big liquidity event. The other liquidity events could be companies getting sold. So let's say companies got acquired by another organization, and if it happened to be an all cash deal versus a cash and equity mix, there also is a scope of liquidity. Then there are buyback programs wherein, let's say a company going to raise funds, let's say I raise $50 million, and I've had an agreement with the new investors that of the $50 million I'll use $10 million for ESOP buyback. Let's say I'm raising the round at $200 million of valuation. Just before the round, at $150 million of valuation, I'll buy back ESOP. So you as an employee might have received a grant at 50 million, it has grown to 150 million, so three times the value now. And let's say 15 percentage or 50 percentage of what you own you can sell. You'll have to pay 30% tax on that, but yeah, you have the right to sell right now, so you can create wealth for yourself. So those are some liquidity events. Usually we have seen liquidity events post a certain stage or a certain size, post series C, series D. But there have been instances, and this is totally on the grit and grit of the founders to do that, and also the maturity of investors to allow for something of that sort to happen. Because when they're giving money, they're not giving money for people to create wealth, they're giving money for the business to grow at an early stage largely, right? So but I'll give this example of Better Half. It's a YC company. It's into the matrimony space. It's a Series A startup, and they did a liquidity event for the company. I think it was small, but still, because they did that, imagine the impact that it has on all the employees. There are people sitting next to them who have made wealth, whatever little wealth they've made. Now, ESOP in Better Half is not paper money, right? It is real because they've tasted that. And I think that is something which investors also should allow for the founders to do for their employees. And eventually, of course, late stage companies do that for multiple reasons because it is also good for them value wise. They're able to buy back ESOPs at slightly lesser price than the round. So eventually it's a win-win both for employees and for the company.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, man. It's all paper money now. That's where the level of importance that is given to it people don't perceive it. Like interns,
Right,
people who are young don't really perceive it because you've not seen success stories. The more you have of that, the more people will really get it. And also, what Kunal Shah says about us as a society, we don't talk of money, right? Money is like a taboo.
taboo,
So
correct, it is
yeah, and
privately kept.
yeah, and
Secretly
whatever
kept.
is happening, I was just reading about yesterday or day before. I forgot this company. It's a fintech company who did a small
Mhm.
buyback. I forgot the name. It was just one post. I've even forgotten the name. It should have been celebrated, right? It's a win for the ecosystem.
Absolutely right, absolutely right.
Why am I forgetting the name? See, that's the thing. It's not information. I just read it as an off post by somebody. It should be celebrated. Yeah. Um okay. Last bit of the questions, and this is the most interesting one, and which people uh, really are interested in, and me
Got it.
included, which is the comp hikes that are expected, right? Let's dive into this. Maybe we start with what was sort of last year's, and I think you are the best suited to answer this. What was last year like across the board for mostly startups? Because I think that's our range of expertise, startups and some large companies. But more importantly, where do you see it going in 2024?
Got it. So firstly I must admit last year was really tough when it comes to startup in general, also not just startups in general also. the hike percentages were down from the 2020, I would say 1 to 2022 or 3, right? So it has been bad 2 years in the past. In 2023, uh, when we also run annual compensation surveys, so we ran a survey where it was projected to be, uh, I think, around 11%, but we assumed that it will be around 8.5%, because we are also in this space of compensation management and we know how much hikes are actually being given. So it was actually 9%, which is, for startups, less than 10% is a big thing, right? I think, for the first time in the last decade, it has come down to less than 10%, which was the last year.
Mm.
Good news, this year it is going to be more. When we spoke to companies last time, approximately 20% of the companies that we spoke to said there are going to be no increments. This is as of last year. This year, this number of companies who are going ahead with zero increments is less than 10%. So the situation has improved. Even the projections, when it comes to how much increment percentages will be given, it is around 11.5%, which is being projected. Actual might vary, but yeah, as far as the responses of organizations are concerned, it is going to be 11.5%. Late stage tech startups are going to be giving slightly higher. You can assume 13 to 14% as their budgets. Early stage, mid stage will be slightly lesser, averaging around 11.5%.
Got it. Got it.
Oh, but that doesn't mean everybody will get 11.5%. It is just mean the company's budget is going to be 11.5%.
Got it. But there's going to be like those ranges there, right? The ones like who are then your performance and everything we just spoke of, performance managers, all of that come in. Uh,
Absolutely. So let me, okay, and okay, polarizing. Okay, if you are an engineer and a top performer, what you should expect in terms of hike? 11.5% as budget, multiplied by 1.5, which is because you're a top performer, multiplied by 1.5 because you are an engineer. That is what you could expect in hike, which could be 22.5 to 27%. This is ideal. Don't be greedy. If you're getting more than this, be more than happy. But ideally, this is what you should be getting scientifically.
oh my, I don't know if I should publish this because when जिसको नहीं मिलेगा they be like अरे तो but yeah again with a pinch of salt for everyone listening in because it's sort of a lot of nuances to companies and
A
all of
lot of
that.
nuances. Yes, yes. You might be overpaid already, by the way, so you may not get so much.
Yeah, yeah, very fair point. People don't get that.
Correct.
uh, Cool. Anurag, this was lovely, and this is why I love to do this. There's a lot of education, especially in this space, a space that most people don't get. Yet, this is that one thing you're most, I think, the most important thing. No matter how many employee surveys we do, everything
Correct.
we do, the one question we never ask is a question on compensation because the answer is always negative. I've never
Correct.
come across where the question is answer is a positive. Yet a lot of education is not there in this space, and thank you for sharing that. I hope people listen to this and take away whatever the ideally should be taking away from this. Any closing thoughts, especially on CompUp, about you, Anurag, that listeners need to
Absolutely,
know?
absolutely. Firstly, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for allowing me to share this with the larger audience. There's one
Pleasure.
thing that I want to bring out through this podcast. See, we as an organization are wanting to make fair pay a reality for companies, for employees, for everybody. But that has it is also sort of a cultural shift that has to be brought about in India market. Uh, for example, when it comes to the conversations around pay, when it comes to pay transparency, see, pay transparency, everybody does not mean that everybody in the organization should be knowing everybody's salaries, right? It doesn't mean that necessarily. And that is because we are humans at the end of the day, and humans have egos, right? That will always have the better side of our judgment, right? So pay transparency just means people not knowing how much of everybody, right? They should know why so much, which means they should know the why behind how they are paid, what they are paid. And that is something which you as an organization can bring about in your organization, a change that you can bring about, right? So let's take an example of sales incentive versus annual increments. People rarely complain of bias when they get their sales incentive. Why is that? Because they know the exact maths of why they are getting so much of sales incentive. But they are extremely negative, skeptical about the annual increments that they get. They think that there's bias at play and 15 other things, right? The reason for that is it's a black box. You have not told your employees how they are getting paid, what they are getting paid. And that is the reason for all of this, right? Dissatisfaction with comp and all of that. Why are people not dissatisfied with their sales incentive?
Mm.
I think it is this change that you should as an organization bring about, that educate more on why they are being paid so much, and that starts with building a compensation philosophy for your organization, which defines the science behind compensation decisions. Every time you make a compensation decisions, go back to that page of science, and it should be easy to explain the change or the compensation decisions with respect to that science. See, as far as possible, I know of companies who have a public facing reward philosophy, which means their employees have access to that document. It may not have numbers where you are pegged with respect to market or how much will you pay for engineering, may not have that. But it should have that, okay, I will reward my people for performance. You can write that, right? I'll reward for performance. I'll maybe not penalize for tenure. I'll stay at par with market, and maybe I'll also reduce pay disparities so that people know that if I am overpaid, my increment might be lesser than the person who is underpaid. So now there will be no question of why do people are paid differently. They know the science, the numbers you can keep to yourself. But if philosophy wise, if you bring it out, I think your people will be more satisfied with compensation. And see, it is perception of fairness when it comes to compensation than actual fairness. If you are able to make your employees feel that they are being paid fairly, I think you have 90% of the job already done. Remaining 10% is what CompUp can help you do with respect to actually conducting that increment. But I think 90% of the job is your own, where you have to first build a compensation philosophy. How to drive it is secondary. So yeah, that is my parting thought on how do we make this fair pay a reality for our employees. Yeah, so that's all.
It's lovely, and it's given me a lot of food for thought when you put it that way. It just seems why aren't we fair with this? I think largely because we think that, yeah, if we are just fair, it'll be perceived negatively. But the reality is
Correct.
what you just said. If you're not being fair, if you're not being open and transparent, it's actually having more cascading grapevine effects, right? Great. You've given me a lot of food for thoughts. You shared a lot of info for a lot of people. I hope people get value out of this. And thank you, Anurag. Thank you for coming on. It's a great. Wow, we've crossed more than an hour. Didn't realize that.
Right.
All right. Thanks, Anurag.
Thank you so much for having me, Rana. Pleasure talking to you again. Looking forward for more riveting conversations like this. Maybe next time we'll do something, uh, maybe related to unfair pay practices or something like that. But yeah,
Oh, yeah.
really lovely, being on this podcast and some really exciting conversations for the larger audience. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Anurag. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit a subscribe. It's really, really going to be helping me out. Thank you, and see you next time.